Good morning for those watching us in the United States, and good afternoon for our guests in Europe. I'm Ben Haddad. I'm the director of the Future Europe Initiative here at the Atlantic Council in Washington. And I'm honored to host today a conversation with European Commissioner for Home Affairs, Ylva Johansson. Commissioner Johansson is responsible for issues of internal security, fighting cybercrime, issues of migration, and all of these topics are critical in the crisis that both the United States and Europe and the entire world is facing with COVID-19. And we're very grateful for you for joining us, Commissioner Johansson. As you know, the European Union, as a strategic partner of the United States, is a core objective of the Future Europe Initiative here at the Atlantic Council. We hosted last week a public conversation with our partners of GlobeSec about the economic impact and the response to this crisis in Central and Eastern Europe. In 2 days, I will host a dialogue with former Italian Prime Minister Enrico Letta about the situation in Italy and the economic debate that the European Union is going through right now with the Eurogroup today and the question of the Eurobonds. And we're very grateful to host today this conversation with Commissioner Johansson as part of our strong partnership with the European Union and the EU delegation in Washington. Before I turn to the first question, let me just remind a few rules. We want this to be interactive. You can ask questions. We're going to be here for about 20-25 minutes. You have a Q&A box if you're connected on Zoom, and you can ask questions. We will read them during the conversation. This conversation will also be streamed live on Twitter, on my account, on the Commissioner's account. So you can also just directly ask us questions, and we will read them on Twitter. Commissioner, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Before I talk about your portfolio and responsibilities, you've had a lot on your plate right now, both on the question of migration and the question of internal security and fighting cybercrime. Let me just ask you about the broader European Commission response to COVID-19. We've seen a lot of initiatives coming from the von der Leyen Commission. Initially, some controversy about divisions within the European Union, but now we're seeing a common response. Tell us a little bit about what is the role of the European Commission in tackling this crisis?
Well, I think that the European Commission have acted stronger and quicker than anybody had expected, actually. It was the 2nd of March when I was presented as part of the Corona response team in the Commission. And more or less, we've been working around the clock since then under the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen. And in many aspects, we are dealing with things where the competence really lies among the member states, but they have asked the Commission to step in, to take a stronger role, and we have been doing that. And I think that we've been acting much quicker than anybody expected. You can just make the comparison with the financial crisis, where many people think that it took more or less 4 years before the European Commission actually responded correctly. And now we have in 4 weeks actually been able to respond a lot. Is that enough? I don't know, because I guess there's going to be a marathon. Actually, I think that we need to focus on these issues for a long time, and also the implications for many other political areas. We can come back to that later. But so far, I think that both when it comes to money, when it comes to public procurement, stockpiling, dealing with borders, dealing with guidelines, dealing with the single market, the functioning of the single market, repatriation of EU citizens, a lot of these issues we have been responding quite quickly. And may I especially point out, I think, the importance of protecting workers. We have set up this scheme where employers can be subsidized to keep their workers during this enormous downwards or lockdown in economy, so that people will not be unemployed, and that the companies can have their skilled workers there when economy starts again. And I think this is an important way of the European way of life.
Yeah, Yeah, obviously we've seen the major curves for unemployment both in the United States and in the European Union, and you're right to underline the strong reaction on the protection of unemployed workers, or for the incentives for companies to keep their workers rather, from the European Commission. And I think it is important also that you underline that initially health is not among the exclusive competencies of the European Union, but we've still seen a strong reaction both on the health side and on the economic side from the European Commission. I want to focus a little bit on the many aspects that you're responsible for, and starting with migration. There are a few issues, right, that are at the heart of this. There's been the question of closing borders and what that means for Schengen right now, but also in the long run, this being one of the core dimension of the European Union. But the second one I also want to ask you about, I've seen that you've made strong statements about the risk of the coronavirus spreading in refugee camps in Greece and elsewhere, and underlying the sanitary risk. And I'd love to hear what are the measures that the European Union intends to take in that area.
Yes, migrants and refugees are among the most vulnerable in our societies, and some of them also stay now in migrant camps. Some of them even overcrowded with already from the beginning a not so good sanitary situation. So of course it's of utmost importance that a society, that we together can protect those that are some of the most vulnerable. Some of them are also in the labor market, and those are in many cases those that will lose their jobs first because they have a very precarious work, some of them. So this is important. I would very much welcome that some member states like Portugal very quick took the decision to cover refugees and migrants into the same kind of services, health services, social protection, so that's everybody else, that all others citizens have. But we're also taking special measures to support these migrant camps that we have in some countries of first entry. Especially been a lot of focus on the camps on the Greek islands that were all overcrowded with bad living conditions already from the beginning, and this has been very much focus for me. We have set up an emergency response action plan together with the Greek authorities that is now starting to run to relocate the most vulnerable out of these camps, so that sick and elderly people should not be there if the virus comes there. We're also working on relocation of unaccompanied minors into other member states that could welcome them under good conditions, and a lot of supply, of course, for healthcare workers, this special hospital tents and things like this that we will help to supply with.
Yeah, we've seen sort of backslash, obviously, with the rise of populist movements since the migration crisis of 2015 within the European Union, and a lot of debates about putting more resources with Frontex and border security, and debates within internal borders. Obviously, what few people know here is that the Schengen agreements allow for flexibility and allowed for a temporary reimposition of borders as long as it's coordinated and for national security reasons. But are you concerned with longer-term consequences on the Schengen agreements of crisis like this one?
This is one of the most common questions actually I got, and no, I'm not afraid of that. I see very clear that the immediate response from many member states was to close down their borders and to make a lot of restrictions, but it took very, very short time before they were asking for cooperation, coordination, and trying to find ways to help each other, to open the borders and to let goods flow, to let cross-border workers that commute be able to cross the borders and things like that. And I actually made this, I also saw the same on an individual level, where when this broke out, some individuals, they immediately rushed to the supermarket and bought a lot of toilet paper and pastas, and there was empty shelves. But I think after a few days home with your toilet paper and your pastas, you realize what you really need in these times when you're in the crisis. You really need good neighbors that can help you if you are not allowed to go out, for example, if you're put in a quarantine, that can help you with support in many aspects. And I see so exactly the same reaction from member states. So they immediately understood that, no, yes, we need each other. This is really the moment where we can't cope with this ourselves. We have to work together. So I think we will come back to a full functioning Schengen area. I'm not so afraid that this will affect the European Union and the values badly. There are some other things that concerns me more, but this is not one of those.
Yeah. We need each other. You're right to underline this. And we've seen actually very inspiring stories of patients from a country being treated in neighboring countries, French patient going to Luxembourg or Germany, for example, and a lot of stories of solidarity in the last few weeks as well. I want to move to another core area of your portfolio, which is the question of cybercrime. We've seen a spike actually in cybercrimes, both fraud of people pretending to sell masks and medical equipment online to vulnerable people. We've also seen some cyber attacks. I think there was one reported against a hospital in the Czech Republic. What is the EU doing to step up on this? And I also want to ask you about the long-term consequences of this. There's obviously responding to the spike in the current crisis, but what does it mean for your responsibility in the longer term beyond just this COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah, the first thing is that what we see is that the organized criminal groups are very, very quick to adapt to a new situation. And that means that the law enforcement and police also need to be extremely quick to adapt. And all this is going on online right now. And that means that we have to cooperate to deal with it and to fight it. We are doing this with the Europol in the heart of the cooperation on the European level, but also we work through with them. Atlantic Cooperation, for example, we do a lot of things together. And I think this is absolutely necessary. It's not possible to fight this alone. But we can also see that we've made also some progress in fighting this together. So this is really an area where we must do much more. And of course, the criminals has gone online since a long time. But I think it's very obvious now that we have also to adjust our legislation. A lot of the evidence that you need when you go to court, for example, is now 85% is based online, for example. That's why I have made proposals on make it easier for law enforcement to get this evidence. We have to have a much, much closer cooperation between the police forces and law enforcement in different countries, and we are also preparing for that. And I'm preparing also for a new strategy to fight organized crimes. So there's a lot of things that is ongoing. But what I like to say one thing here is I think that so many people right now, they focus very understandable on sick people, the spread of the virus, people that are dying out of the virus. And of course, this is the headlines all over. But we must be aware that even if these crimes are not in headlines right now, they are ongoing. So we should not be naive that we go into put everything else on side. Just because of the virus, we need to continue working to fight the criminals and to strengthen the law enforcement, and especially to make the law enforcement go digital fully.
Yeah, we need to continue working on the issues that we're working. The world continues to move, and some of the challenges that we were working on before are obviously still front and center. And you're right to mention this. I'm very interested by what you just said on moving the law enforcement digital. Obviously, the question of digital sovereignty has been a key priority for the von der Leyen Commission. And I'm also interested in knowing, do you think this is going to be even more of a priority as we're all teleworking right now. We're using Zoom and other sort of equipment to communicate, and maybe some of our habits in work and in health, in law enforcement I just mentioned will be shifting in the long term, and that's something that we'll know probably in the weeks, months, and years to come. How much of this do you think will move even more the Commission to act on these issues?
Yeah, I think you are right on that. And I think that we're going to live with this virus for a long time. We're going to live with social distancing for a long time. Even we have to go back to normal, but it's not going to be the old normal. It's going to be a new normal. And I think that will include a lot more online working. But may I also say that means that a lot of children are much more online, and many children are vulnerable. And we can see some very, very worrying signals that online that child sexual abuse online is really increasing now, both for pedophiles searching for child sexual abuse content online, but also grooming, trying to get in contact with children that are spending a lot of time now in front of their computer. And this is really something that worries me. And this is going on right now. So this is really something that have to be to concern, of course, the law enforcement, but also parents and organizations, and to make advice for the children and maybe supervise where they are and what they are going and what they are doing on the web right now.
Yeah, this is also such a fundamental issue that you bring up. We have a question online, and please, as I said, you can write your question in the Q&A box that you have at the bottom of your screen. From Javier saying, Commissioner Johansson, congratulations for the terrific job you're doing. How would COVID-19 impact on the new pact on migration and asylum?
Well, we're quite. We are almost finished with the new deal on migration and asylum. And of course, that we have to take into account that we have to have some flexibility with new regulation that can deal with a crisis like this, but there will not be a fundamental impact from this crisis into the new proposal. I think the most important thing with the new proposal is that the political need of managing migration together in European Union and to find a way to I mean, migration is here. Migration has always been here. Migration will always be here. So we have to manage migration in an orderly way, and we have to stick to our values, to the right of the asylum seekers and to solidarity. And this has not changed according to the virus.
Yeah, you're right. And this is among obviously the critical issues that were already front and center in your portfolio before this crisis. We had seen a new crisis on the border between Greece and Turkey, and obviously this doesn't change. I want to ask you a little bit, as we're the Atlantic Council and we strongly believe in the relationship between the US and the EU. You did mention Atlantic cooperation a little bit during your response. On your responsibility, what do you expect from the United States now? We're seeing an administration that unfortunately is inward looking in its response to the coronavirus crisis. We're all friends of the transatlantic relationship and the US-EU relationship. What do you think the US could do right now on your responsibilities, and what do you expect from the administration?
I think that we should stick to the good cooperation we already have on different levels. I think in these times, we really need all good forces to stick together and to cooperate. There's a lot of threats here. There's a lot of threat to the rule of law. There's threats towards democracy. There's threats towards fundamental values. There are threats in form of false information. So I think it's extremely, and of course from criminals. So I think in these times, it's extremely important that we especially in a time of crisis, to stick to our fundamental values and to stick to a good cooperation. The good forces should cooperate, and I think that goes for the transatlantic cooperation and also for the multinational corporations.
Yeah, sticking to our values of freedom, rule of law, liberal democracy, and making the case for cooperation. I think that's a perfect way to close this conversation, because you just outlined the core values of the Atlantic Council and why this is so important for us to have these conversations with you, with our European partners, and make the case for global cooperation in this crisis that affects all of us. Thank you so much, Commissioner Johansson, for joining us and for the work that you're doing. And when this is all over, we're looking forward to hosting you in Washington, D.C. in our headquarters.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and take care.
Thank you.